Hi everyone, this is Chandra, and today I am rendering lard. We just bought a whole pig for the freezer, so I always say yes to the back fat and the leaf lard. The leaf lard is what you would use for baking. It does not have a porky flavor if you do it right. I've done it both ways, right and wrong. And the back fat is what I use for sauteing, searing meat, anything that you would use butter for in the pan. So I ended up trying 3 different methods, partly because I wanted to see which one I liked the best, but mostly because I just need to have a lot of back fat to get through, and I wanted to put all of my resources to work. I thought I was just going to do the crock pot method, which I'll kind of talk about more in a little bit, but I was for one realizing that I just had too much fat to rely on only one vessel. I only have one crock pot. So let me show you what I did, and I will let you know what my favorite method and the method I will definitely use for rendering my leaf lard. It is a Sunday morning. It's not that early anymore. I have already started rendering lard. So this is how, when you buy a pig, this is the back fat. You can see there's bits of meat on here too. This is not the fat that you would use for baked goods, because this will taste porky. Not as strong as bacon because it's not cured in any way or smoked, but it will have a flavor. I use it for cooking eggs, everything, sauteing vegetables. It's great for all of those things. But this is how it comes, and it needs to turn into lard. In the end, it looks like this. It starts as a liquid. I have some going in my slow cooker already, and pour it into jars when it is melted. Put the lid on. Sometimes I pressure can this. That's a new thing for me. It should be shelf stable, especially if you get the lid on while it's nice and hot, and that will seal itself. It's not as strong of a steel as canning it, and if there's any water, it will get moldy. So I might pressure can this. I hate to put it under high heat, but I know people do that and it's fine. So maybe I'm imagining a problem where there isn't one. So anyway, this is what we're looking for in the end, a nice white fat. Now leaf lard, which is the kidney fat, the fat around the organs, that is even whiter. It's beautiful, and there's you need to make sure there's no meat going into that lard. But right now we are just doing back fat. So I have some going already. I'll show you that, and then we can get some more cut up and keep the process going. I am using my KitchenAid meat grinder attachment for this. You just want to be cut up. I mean, you really could even drop it in the slow cooker like this, but it would take a very long time and you wouldn't get as much out of it. So if you don't have a meat grinder, I have definitely just cut this up into little cubes and got it into the slow cooker that way. But since I have this, I'm gonna use it. Now you can put a little bit, like a 1/4 cup of water in the bottom of the slow cooker as it's getting going to keep the fat from burning on the bottom. My slow cooker has a warm setting, so I just put it on that and I stir it a lot in the beginning, and it seems to be fine. If you do need to add the water, it will boil off by the time the fat is ready. I do try and cut big pieces of meat off. You don't have to. So I'm just cutting these up into small enough pieces that I can get them into my KitchenAid. And what I do is I did an initial batch here. As it melts down, it takes up less space in the slow cooker, so I will add more. And as it melts, I will start ladling it off into jars so that I'm not leaving liquid fat in there, and I can keep adding more fat, because I have like 6 packages like this. And they're in my refrigerator, and I'd like them to be out of my refrigerator. We just got a whole pig at the end of last week, Friday, I guess. and rather than putting this in the freezer and dealing with it later, I just thawed it right away, and I'm gonna get it into jars because our freezer space is gonna run short. We have a half a cow coming as well. So let me show you how this is looking. I just had to wash my hands, but let me show you how this is looking before I add more to it. I'm not ready to start ladling this off yet because there's just not enough to bother with. But once this fat is floating in more liquid, you can see it starting to happen, then I will start ladling off into jars. I keep this just on the warm setting because I don't want to burn it. That really ruins it. That's looking really nice. I have tried lots of ways of rendering lard. I've done it on the stovetop, I've done it in the oven. You know, everybody has their favorite way. This I find to be the most low maintenance for me and the least likely for me to burn it because I tend to walk away and do other things. This I can do that with, and it's gonna go for days. So let's get this plugged in and going. I run my mixer on the lowest setting for this. I followed the directions for grinding meat the first time. I used it for fat, which is a higher setting, and it destroyed the motor. Joe, my husband, had to replace the motor, so don't do that. Do it on the very lowest speed and it does just fine. So this is all ground up. I added as much as I can to the slow cooker for now until I can remove some of the melted fat. And this I will stick in the refrigerator, and throughout the day I'll add it in as I remove. I probably won't open any more bags today. I think I have 3 or 4 left in there. So I'm gonna wash all of this stuff, get this in the fridge, and I can just do this as I go about my day. So I did turn this off overnight, and then the next morning I turned it back on, but I could tell it was starting to get a little darker, and that's when it's starting to scorch and not be as stable of a fat and just not as good of a product. So I'm straining the rest of this fat out. I'm going to get another jar with the stuff that drains out. And I end up discarding that fat, which is kind of a bummer because it looked like there was a lot left in it. So the next thing I'm going to do is get a pot into the oven to render that way. So I'll set the oven at 200 degrees, and I have my strainer that it can fit in the oven set underneath my meat grinder. So that process is the same. I'm just going to pack as much as I can into that strainer, and I'll put this in the oven for an hour at 200. Make sure that it's starting to render, so I'll lift that strainer up and see that there's fat dripping. And then I will turn it up to 275 for about 5 hours. I think I actually stopped it around 4 hours. And there was a little bit of fat in there that wasn't crispy, so there probably could have been more obtained. But I stopped around 4 hours, and that was the second method that I tried. Now I'm working on my third method, which is a cast iron, nice heavy pot on top of the stove. So I'm gonna fill this pot up. I just added a little bit of water. I used about a half a cup because it's a lot of fat, to make sure that the bottom doesn't burn while it's getting going and getting a bit melty in there. So that water will boil off no problem in the amount of time it takes all of this fat to render. And there's my oven working. So I'm gonna get this on a very low heat and let it go for a couple hours. This doesn't take as long. You can hear it bubbling. Once the bubbling stops is when there is no more water. Fat itself doesn't really boil. It just is still. So when I wait for it to be still and consider it done. I did let this cool a little bit. It's still warm. I let it cool a little bit because I'm putting it into plastic, and I don't love doing that, but I'm getting to where I'm running low on jars. So I have this food grade bucket that I'm using. And I will say this method, I think, gets the most for your money out of the fat. Like those pieces are all crispy. I got the most liquid out of it. I do think it is not my favorite method though. The fat I'm pouring out of this pot right now was the oven fat, and that was my favorite. It was not scorched at all. It was super pale. I'll show you a comparison of all my jars. I did put some of that stovetop fat into a jar so that I could really see the difference in them. And it's pretty good, but it is not as good as the oven rendered fat. So I think it's fine. All these methods are great and they work. The crock pot was good until the very end, where it did start to get a little darker. But as long as I was removing fat as I went, that was fine. But for my leaf lard, I am absolutely going to use the oven rendering method because that stuff is gold. Here are the final results. All the way on the left here, I have the crock pot. I've got, on the left is the first pullings from the crock pot, and then at the very end, that's the last bit. You can see it's much darker. In the middle here is my stove top, and then on the right is my oven. And you can see the clear winner is the oven, although the early crock pot was pretty good too.